Nadal, okay? I want to read his bio. It's going to take a minute because he's a very accomplished scientist, and I would like everybody's attention, if you don't mind. Dr. Gerard Nadal is a graduate of St. Peter's Boys High School here on Staten Island. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology and philosophy from St. John's University, and then attended Columbia University's post-baccalaureate pre-medical program, after which he returned to St. John's University, where he earned a master's degree in cellular and molecular biology, a master's degree in medical microbiology, and a PhD in molecular microbiology. He then did a postdoctoral fellowship in microbial physiology at York College of the City University of New York. While at Columbia University, Dr. Nadal did 3 years of research work in the Department of Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology. Sorry if I'm pronouncing any of these words wrong. And this followed 7 years of work in the 1980s at Covenant House in Times Square, where Dr. Nadal worked with homeless teens. Dr. Nadal began teaching college students at St. John's University in the early 1990s, and has since held teaching posts at Manhattan College as visiting professor of biological sciences, and at Holy Apostles College and Seminary as professor of biological sciences and academic dean. He has recently joined the faculty of St. Paul's School of Nursing here on Staten Island. Now into his third decade of service to the Catholic medical community and the pro-life movement as a researcher, prolific author, speaker, and bioethicist, Dr. Nadal has served as the first National Director of Medical Students for Life, is the past Executive Director of the Children First Foundation, and for the past 7 years has served as President and CEO of the Coalition on Abortion and Breast Cancer. As an author, Dr. Nadal has authored the highly acclaimed Catholic pro-life science blog, Coming Home, contributed to several Catholic and pro-life publications, authored chapters in several books, and serves as contributing author and peer reviewer for the Linacre Quarterly, the medical and ethics journal of the Catholic Medical Association. Just 2 weeks ago, Dr. Nadal was honored by the Catholic Medical Association at their annual meeting in Denver, Colorado, with the prestigious Linacre Award for his groundbreaking article, charting a course toward a new vaccine strategy that has proposed a workable strategy for Catholic universities and hospitals to develop moral and ethical means of producing vaccines and other pharmaceuticals without the use of cell lines established from aborted fetuses. His award was also in recognition for his tireless work throughout the pandemic in leading Catholic medicine through the thickets of COVID epidemiology and using epidemiology to help predict the peaks and lulls in the waves of new outbreaks. His no-nonsense, politics-free approach to the science made him one of the most respected and sought-after sources of reliable information by physicians, policymakers, and radio hosts. Closer to home, Dr. Nadal has served the Staten Island Boy Scout community for over a decade as a leader, most notably in Catholic Scouting. He has mentored dozens of boys, including his son, to the rank of Eagle Scout, and continues to mentor many of these young men through their college years and early professional years. A 4th degree Knight of Columbus, in August of this year, Dr. Nadal and his wife Regina celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They have 3 adult children, 2 of whom are in college, and 1 who is expecting the birth of her first child any day now. And with all of this, he cooked a lot of the food and
Well, we have a lot of ground to cover and a little time to cover it in. What did you say? I had about a half hour, Debbie, and then we can open it up for questions? All right, that's it. Never had a professor a microphone and give him the time. Okay, so some of the work that I've been doing the last 7 years, a lot of the work I've been doing the last 7 years, has been going around the country and meeting with Catholic nursing students, Catholic medical students, kids that are pro-life, and want to do just really good traditional Hippocratic medicine, pro-life medicine, and they're not being taught well at all in the medical schools and the nursing schools, and actually now there's quite a bit of persecution against them. So the Coalition on Abortion and Breast Cancer has made it its mission over the last 7 years. We kind of pivoted and said what we really need to do is bring in the next generation of pro-life doctors and nurses. We have to form them, and then we have to network them with the older generation of Catholic doctors and nurses who are pro-life, and then we have to hand over the reins to them, because I want to retire and sit back and watch them really go and rampage across the landscape. And so a lot of good things are happening. However, there's a lot that's not good that's happening, and so we're going to cover all of it today, all in about a half hour, okay? Okay, first of all, how good was it that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey Now, some of what I'm going to mention, unfortunately, delves into political areas, but I'm not going to get political about it. I'm just going to say this. When we prayed for the last half century for an end to abortion, the whole focus has been on if we can only get a majority of justices on the Supreme Court, we can overturn abortion, right? But you have to be careful what you wish for, you have to be careful what you pray for, because once that happens, you have to be prepared for what follows. And what we're in the middle of now is 50 different Roe v. Wade fights in 50 different states. Okay? And now, strategically, it was good for the national leadership of the pro-life movement when we were just focusing on the Supreme Court, because we could marshal all of our resources and fight that one battle. But now, we're kind of divided across 50 different states, using 50 different strategies for 50 different groups of state legislatures, and trying to pass laws. You know, so our resources, in a sense, have been diluted down. However, don't underestimate the power of your prayer when you stand and pray. I'm not saying that glibly, I'm not saying that lightly, I'm not patronizing anybody. I mean that. If you don't think that God is in charge, let's take a look back over Republican presidents. Could Gerald Ford get the job done ending Roe v. Wade? Was Ronald Reagan able to get the job done? What about George H.W. Bush? What about George W. Bush? No. It took New York's own billionaire reformed playboy reformed playboy, host of his own reality TV show, and that was God's instrument for bringing down abortion. So if you don't think that God writes straight with crooked lines, if that doesn't prove it, nothing does, okay? God will use the most unlikely source. Nobody ever saw the fact of nobody ever really thought Donald Trump would become president. And yet he had not one, not two, but 3 picks for the Supreme Court, and picked all staunchly pro-life, conservative, Catholic justices, just as he promised he would do. Okay? So give God a big hand. Prayer works. It just usually doesn't work in the way you think it's going to work. Okay? So now we're in the middle of a mess. And as I go around the country and I talk to medical students, the faculties at medical schools have turned up the heat on traditional students, on conservative kids, on kids that either identify as pro-life or just kids that say, look, I don't really identify as pro-life. I just want to practice traditional Hippocratic medicine. That's all I want to do. And yet, that is now persecuted. So when I meet with the students, I no longer meet with them on campus. Because when I used to meet students on campus, the really ultra left-wing faculty would come down and they would want to show their students how this poor little PhD doesn't really understand medicine. And would try to debate me on the abortion breast cancer line. And an hour and a half later, I'd leave them bleeding all over the floor. And that's good. I mean, you need to use the data to destroy your arguments. I mean, and all I ever do is just use the scientific data. No clever arguments, just hold up the data. And then they would say things like, well, that's just pro-life talking points. And I'd say, okay, so, I would bring with me, there's 80 journal articles from top-tier medical journals that are multiple authors for each article that went through editorial boards with peer reviewers, and all of those people are in on the conspiracy. Physician, heal thyself, right? And so I don't meet with the students on campuses anymore because what I found out was happening was when it comes time for the medical student to get matched with their residency program of choice, they weren't getting matched. So now what I do is I go around and I meet them and I say, look, I will meet you, bring a whole bunch of your friends, kind of like Nicodemus meeting Jesus in the middle of the night, right? And so bring your friends, we'll go meet at a local Panera Bread because they don't shake students out of Panera Bread. And we sit down and I buy them a meal, I give them all a book called Complications, Abortion's Impact on Women. It's a book that was authored by many different scientists and physicians, each writing in their own area of expertise, talking about all of the psychological and psychiatric impact of abortion on women, the abortion breast cancer link, the gynecological problems, the reproductive problems that get left behind. Abortion is physiologically a very, very consequential event. It is not something that happens lightly, and it is not something that does not leave a residue. A lot of women are harmed, and in multiple ways, by abortion. I won't get into all of it because you all just had a nice dinner. Okay, so we'll let the dinner just sit and digest. However, I will talk a little bit about the most hotly contested issue. Somebody on my board of directors was talking to a reporter from, what's that, One American News Network or something like that? Okay? And so it looks like I'm probably going to be on TV now, so we're going to ratchet it up. Talking about the link between abortion and breast cancer, which the other side doesn't want anybody to know. So I have to say that a bunch of my friends who are pro-life priests about 20 years ago started calling me and saying, hey, Jerry, we're hearing about a link between abortion and breast cancer. And I said, oh, for the love of Pete, listen, guys, you have Pope John Paul II. He wrote all kinds of great stuff. Work your side of the street. That sounds absurd, okay? I mean, it's absurd to think that there's a link between the two. And, they kept pestering me about it. So then finally I said, I'm going to have to do some research, find out where they're going wrong, and I'll take the boys out to dinner, buy them dinner, and explain where they went wrong. So 3 months later, I took the boys out to dinner, and I ate crow. Because it turned out there's a real distinct link between induced abortion and breast cancer. Let me say right from the beginning, if women have had miscarriages, usually first trimester, early second trimester, there is no link between early miscarriage and breast cancer. But there is a link between induced abortion and breast cancer. So now you're all about to get a quick little biology lesson, because this is very simple. Let's consider a young woman who has never been on birth control, has never been pregnant, okay? So physiologically, we say this is a naive subject. This young woman gets pregnant. Immediately, what's the first sign that most women realize they're pregnant, even before a menstrual cycle? Their breasts get swollen, tender, engorged, right? Why? Because as soon as a woman gets pregnant, her estrogen levels go up about 2,000%. And estrogen is a hormone that stimulates breast tissue production. So in the first half of a first pregnancy, a young woman's breasts will roughly double the number of cells that are involved in making milk. So she'll roughly double the number of cells, all under the influence of estrogen. Now those cells in that young woman are what we call type 1 and type 2 cells. They're very immature, they're very cancer prone, they're not capable of making milk yet. Yet, this young woman has now more than doubled that number of cells. What happens in the third trimester of the pregnancy is that the baby will make a hormone called placental lactogen. That's the hormone that stimulates the breast to start producing milk. Okay? So if the kid wants to eat, we put him to work right away. Okay? Because it's the baby making that hormone, not the mother. Right? The placenta is one of the baby's organs, it's not the mother's organ. So the baby makes placental lactogen, and now the woman's breasts start to produce milk. How do women know this? What do women experience during that third trimester? What do they notice the breasts start doing? Leaking. Why? Because they're making milk. Okay? And that's because the kid is producing that hormone. Well, what we've learned is that hormone, placental lactogen, converts those type 1 and type 2 cells that are young, immature, and very cancer prone, and it converts them into what we call type 3 and type 4 cells. And type 3 and type 4 cells not only produce milk, they become cancer resistant for life. God's wise design. The mother gives life to the baby, and the baby reciprocates life back to the mother. Now, what I just told you, the other side will not debate. It's in every gynecology textbook in the world. This is just known. This is well known. Now, in a first full-term pregnancy, about 85% of those type 1, type 2 cells get converted to type 3 and type 4. They remain cancer-resistant for life. With breastfeeding and with subsequent pregnancies, the remaining 15% of those cells will gradually become type 3, type 4 cells as well. So the younger a woman is when she gets pregnant with the first full-term pregnancy, the higher what we call the protective effect of a first full-term pregnancy. Okay? This is just known. This is not debated by anybody in the medical community. It is well established. So where does abortion factor in? When a woman has an induced abortion, all right, now we call miscarriage spontaneous abortion. We're not talking about those. With an induced abortion, what happens is usually the baby is removed from the uterus in the first trimester or the early second trimester. That's most of them. When that happens, is there ever a third trimester? If there's no third trimester, then there's no placental lactogen being made. The mother is now left with twice as many cancer-prone cells as she had before. And no protective effect from placental lactogen because there never was any placental lactogen because the baby never made it that far. And because placental lactogen is made by the baby, not the mother. Pretty simple, isn't it? So what we find, Dr. Joel Brind, who's an endocrinologist up at Baruch College at City University, has been doing this work for the pro-life movement now, looking at this for about going on 30 years. And Joel has estimated, doing the epidemiology, that there are roughly 350,000 women out of the women who have had the 62 million abortions who have contracted breast cancer as a result of that abortion. That's a staggering number. Now, when he did his work, he found, taking the most conservative approach to the numbers, that the increased risk is about 40%. That's a 40% increased risk. That's taking a look at the papers that were done here in America that had National Institutes of Health funding that's filled with all kinds of radical pro-reports. Okay, so there are all kinds of games that have been played by researchers with the numbers, and they still came out with 40%. We're seeing papers coming out of China and India and Iran and Iraq that are showing 250% increased risk of breast cancer in women who've had induced abortions. It is a staggering phenomenon. Okay? It's a staggering phenomenon. So now, in our current medical climate, let's now add another layer to this. Planned Parenthood does about 1/3 of all the abortions in the United States. So when a young woman goes to Planned Parenthood, after they do the abortion, what do they hand the girl? Birth control. Right? The combined estrogen, progestin birth control pill. How many people here knew, before I started talking, that the combined estrogen, progestin birth control pill is on the World Health Organization's Group 1 list of carcinogens, known cancer-causing substances? It's on the same list as things like alcohol, tobacco, uranium, plutonium, and the combined estrogen progestin pill. Now, again, this is not the Vatican's list. This is the World Health Organization's list. All right? And yet, our medical students and nursing students are not being taught this. More importantly, young women, or even older women, when they go to their doctors and doctors prescribe this, do not tell them that. They don't tell them that this thing can cause breast cancer. Why? Right? I mean, why? Why the conspiracy of silence? For people who say that they are pro-choice, they are not pro-choice because they don't want women making free and informed choices. So they hide the incriminating evidence. That is the inversion of biomedical ethics. It's biomedical ethics inside out and upside down. And it is the greatest act of disrespect to women when you do not tell a woman all of the possible side effects of an abortion, all of the possible side effects of using the combined estrogen progestin. Also, postmenopausal hormone replacement therapy is on that list as well. But now it gets even more interesting. A bunch of these radical pro-reports who deny, they'll say that there is no link between abortion and breast cancer. We'll get into that in a minute. They deny the legitimacy of that link. And they're the ones that put out the data to begin with. It was their data. So what they do is they turn around and then they say, when the cameras are rolling, there is no link. But when they write papers, they continue to write the truth in the paper because they have to accurately report the data. And so they put that down. So there was this group out at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Institute out in Seattle, Washington. And they're kind of like the Sloan Kettering of the West Coast. They're a phenomenal organization. And I recognize most of the authors on the list as being people who are rapidly pro-abortion, who have been paid witnesses by Planned Parenthood in state courts arguing against parents' rights. And they came out with a paper looking at the factors that lead to premenopausal triple-negative breast cancer. Triple-negative breast cancer is the deadliest and most aggressive form of breast cancer. Very, very difficult to treat. And one of the things that they put in there was looking at all the data. If a young woman starts the birth control pill after the age of 22, her risk for triple-negative breast cancer before menopause goes up 250%. If she starts the birth control pill between the ages of 18 and 22, her risk of triple-negative breast cancer before menopause goes up 270%. And if a young woman starts the birth control pill before the age of 18, so now we're not talking a woman, right? We're talking a child. If they start the birth control pill prior to the age of 18, their risk of the deadliest form of breast cancer goes up 540%. This is a 2009 paper in in a top-tier journal, Cancer, Bioepidemiology, and Biomarkers, okay? How many people know about this? How many people ever heard about this? See what I mean? See what I mean? So, we have a problem. We have a problem in medicine, and the problem is physicians have stopped being taught ethics, right? Medical schools don't teach them. Nursing students don't get ethics classes for the most part. When they do get ethics classes, they don't consider concepts like human freedom and human dignity and what a clinician's role is in respecting human freedom and dignity. They just get kind of like policy papers, what to do. You're in this situation, you do this. You're in this situation, you do this. That's not ethics. Okay? That's not ethics. And now, it gets even worse. We jump to another area that is also related to life. The whole transgenderism issue. Okay? The whole transgenderism issue is a nightmare. Here's what the medical literature actually says. When a child, a young child, preteen or teenager, when young people get confused about what they're actually, there's a difference between gender and sex, right? Sex is male or female. Those are biological distinctions, right? You got your choice, one or the other. You're either male or you're female. That's biological sex. Gender is a linguistic construct that people try to use, and they try to confuse that with biological sex. So when kids are confused about what their sex is, and they feel like, well, I know when I look at myself, I see male, but I really feel female, or the other way around. When I look at myself, I see female, I think I'm male. The literature is very, very clear that if you do nothing but what we call watchful waiting, or provide that child with supportive counseling, 85% of them by the age of 23 will have it all straighten itself out. 85%. But that's not what medicine is doing now. There's over 100 medical centers in the United States of America that specialize in transgendering children. So what we end up doing is we take a kid that's a little confused, maybe even psychiatrically risen to the level of delusional, and what we do is we hand them off to a psychiatrist who plays along with the delusion, okay? Then we hand them off to an endocrinologist who will start pumping them full of hormones to arrest puberty. And then we hand them off after that to surgeons who surgically mutilate. Okay? Now the question is why? And the best answer to this question comes from that esteemed American philosopher, Groucho Marx. And Groucho Marx used to tell one about the guy who goes to a psychiatrist, and he says, you see, doctor, the problem really is that my brother thinks he's a chicken. So the doctor says, well, have you told him he's not a chicken? And the guy says, well, no. And the doctor says, well, why not? The guy says, because we need the eggs. Okay? So when we look at modern medicine today, you have to ask yourself, what happened in the last 20 years? And who's getting the eggs? Why is there nobody willing to stand up and tell these children, you're not a chicken? Why? Why mutilate these kids? The goal for delusional patients used to be very simple. You take objective reality. Like imagine I start riding around New York on a white horse dressed in an 18th century military uniform and say, I'm Frederick the Great. They put me away. All right? But a kid can go and seek out surgical mutilation, and everybody's just happy about that. So what happened? What happened? What happened to medicine? Politics has entered the arena. Politics has entered the arena. In California and in New York, you are not allowed to do therapy that tells this kid, you're not a chicken, or you will lose your medical license. you will lose your medical license. If you try to do reparative therapy with people who have opposite sex therapy with people who are gender confused, you can lose your license to practice. That is now the law. Now, it calls to question the following. Who is the state to tell clinicians how to practice? Now, you can say, well, the state is the one that gives you a license as a doctor or a nurse, right? I mean, I have my wife, Regina, here, a pediatric nurse for 32 years. We have a friend, Laura Sickler, just became an RN. She works in maternity nursing, right? Two great pro-life nurses right here in the room. But the state can tell them that if you tell that kid you're not a chicken, you lose your license, you lose your livelihood. Now, why? How did the state get into the medical licensing business to begin with? Well, go back 150 years to the snake oil salesmen in the 1800s, right? All the quack physicians. And there were a lot of people that were doing a lot of harm to people by selling them quack treatments. And so what the states did was they said, okay, look, we gotta get this under control. So here's what we're gonna do. If you're a physician and you're in a specialty area, then you're gonna have to sit for an examination in your specialty area. And if a governing body of physicians in your area, let's say OBGYN, has deemed that you are competent to practice, if you get their approval, we will give you a license to practice in the state. And it was a way of weeding out the quacks from the legitimate doctors. But now, faithful doctors, faithful nurses, people of faith, cannot practice traditional medicine or traditional nursing with traditional moral and ethical values without the state saying, if you do that, we'll yank that license from you. Well, it was never the job of the state to determine how patients get treated. It was only the duty of the state to make sure that unqualified people didn't do harm to patients. But we have a very politicized medical community. And so now, this is where we are. We had Roe v. Wade overturned. The fight now comes back to the 50 states. That fight is not a fight that stands by itself. It is a fight that is going to be fought in the context of the disintegration of modern medicine. It is a fight that's going to be fought in the context of states like California and New York, who signed legislation a year, 2 years ago, that said, we'll even let physician assistants and nurse practitioners perform surgical abortions. I was 13 years old when Roe v. Wade was passed. I remember the arguments quite well. And I remember the chief argument in favor of legalized abortion was that women were going to back alley practitioners and they were being harmed. Well, Dr. Gerard Nadal, co-founder of the National Abortion Rights Action League, admitted after he had his conversion and came into the Catholic Church, he admitted that he just fabricated all those numbers, that there was very little harm being done to women. However, that was the rationale for legalizing abortion. We don't want back alley practitioners. So once abortion was legalized, it turned out very few doctors who do abortions, or up until a few years ago, had been doctors who were OBGYNs in good standing. And there's a reason for that. If you're an OBGYN in good standing, you bring babies into the world. You don't want to take them out. And yet, abortionists were mostly physicians who were washouts from other branches of medicine. Now they've even let physicians' assistants and nurse practitioners do surgical abortions. Where is this love for women? When we go out and we have a fight on our hands now, you think there was a fight over Roe v. Wade? That was the good old days. We got a fight now. And the fight that we have is we have to educate women. We have to educate people. And we have to ask people, think about who has your best interest at heart. and we have to lay it on the line. And finally, the last thing, and then I can take some questions. A lot of us contented ourselves with not being political because really we needed Supreme Court justices that would overturn Roe v. Wade. And everybody said that was where the fight is. Okay, we won that one. But that was not the war. That was just a battle. That was one battle. We now have 50 battles on our hands. And they are fights. And there are fights not only over abortion, there are fights over conscience protections for doctors and nurses. There are fights over end-of-life decision-making with doctors and nurses that are no longer educated in traditional morality or ethics. Okay? It's a package deal now. And the pro-life movement is going to have to come alongside people who are fighting other battles, and we're going to have to support them. And finally, I leave you with this thought. When people say that's your Roman Catholic values and that has no place in the public sphere, I'm a citizen of the United States of America. My voice counts. And it counts just as much as anybody who works at Planned Parenthood. And actually, it carries more weight because I speak the truth. We are all citizens here. We are all citizens, and there is no such thing as value-free. Value-free is a value in and of itself. And if it's not our values that are going to be voted for on election day, it's going to be somebody else's. Why would we abandon the battlefield? We have done that for far too long, and we see the results of it in the state of modern medicine. But I'm going to leave you with good news here. Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, good Catholic university, is opening an authentically Catholic medical school 2 years from now. Benedictine University in Kansas is opening an authentically Catholic medical school 4 years from now. And a little known fact, it was the Catholic Church who founded Western medicine. People don't know this. In the first century of the church, the only people who ever had physicians were the wealthy. It was those early Christians who were all Catholic, right? Because that's the only kind of Christian there was. It was those early Christians who began to open hospitals and serve the poor. Nursing did not start with Florence Nightingale. Nursing started with religious communities of Catholic sisters. Hundreds and hundreds of years before Florence Nightingale, it was our religious sisters and our religious brothers who started those nursing communities. Florence Nightingale took it into the South. We were there first. And you know what? Medicine is our child. Our church gave birth to Western medicine. And like an unruly teenager, it's done enough damage, we're coming to take it back. And that's the good news. It's already happening, but we took 50 years to get ourselves into this state, and it's going to take us a good 50 years to climb out. But the wheels are in motion, God is in charge, and if Donald Trump could be responsible for overturning Roe v. Wade, there's no telling what's going to happen in the next decade.
That's right.
Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for, here's the time for questions. Is your show now? Okay.
So if anyone has a question for Dr. Jerry,
You know what, well, we're going to ask you to come up here, and then,
Stay there.
Doctor, I learned so much today. I don't want to forget any of it. Is there a book that I could, book that you've written that I
now because she's been after me to write a book for years. I will give Debbie a reference list.
Yes.
All right, so I'll give Debbie a reference list, and then
Your website, Gerard. Oh, your website. Your website.
Yeah, I have a blog. It's at gerardnadal.com. The name of the blog is Coming Home. I've done an awful lot of writing about abortion, the breast abortion. There's about 950 articles on there, so you can start with that, and then I'll give Debbie another reference list of other material.
Jerry?
Yeah, Pete.
Is there a time where you can find out or know when this whole thing of ethics, like, how do these people get in these key positions to make all these decisions that we're not going to teach ethics now? Is it like that happened over 10 years, or these people had to be in key positions to say we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, the question is, how did we get to the point where people work themselves into positions of influence to determine that we're not going to teach traditional ethics anymore? It started, I would say, around the early 1970s, when the hippie radicals realized they weren't going to win the revolution in the streets. So they all went back to college and got PhDs and then became professors and took over the university system.
Really?
Yeah, it took a long time. But what happened was they'd get on and, universities tended to be pretty conservative. So then they would say, well, how come I can't get on the promotion and tenure committee? All right, we'll let you on. And then they started voting on their fellow travelers. And so it was something that took place, I'd say, over a 20-year period from the mid-70s to the mid-90s.
Wow.
By the mid-90s, it was ugly.
Okay, thank you.
Any?
So we have one question by this gentleman here who would like you to clarify the difference between the fight at the Supreme Court level and the fight at the state legislative level.
The fight at the Supreme Court level was easy. You just had to get 6 or more justices, or 5 or more justices, to agree on overturning Roe. At the state legislature level, you're going to have to get a majority of legislators elected. We're on Staten Island. You guys all know Judge Ron Castorina?
Yes.
Right? Ron used to be an assemblyman. Ron would stand up in the state assembly and thunder away at them about, the abortion breast cancer lane, or how black women having a disproportionate number of abortions, right? They're 12% of the population, they have 37% of the abortions. How they were bearing the disproportionate number of consequences of abortion. And there was one day I was watching on TV when I think just about every black legislator in the chamber got up and walked out in protest. I called them up that night and I said, "You are one of God's favorite sons. Don't give up the fight." But it's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly because all of hell has been unleashed here. But we've got God in our corner. All right, but we have to engage the fight. It was one of the things. I tell young people in the pro-life movement, they came in all kind of snarky, like, oh yeah, all those older pro-life people when they used to do political stuff, and the young people thought they had all the answers and they were going to end abortion, and God has graciously granted that people from the first wave of pro-lifers are still with us. And we need to go back to them and learn how they organize at the local level. They were dynamite at organizing at the local level. I know Marietta Cannon, I've talked to Marietta over there in the past about this, and Marietta is a resource for this, We need to learn, the fight has come full circle. The tactics, the strategies come full circle. We're back to where we were in 1973. Only this time, I think we're a little emboldened because we have a Supreme Court victory under our belt.
So as an educator, I won't even talk about my background in performing arts because we know what direction they usually go in. But how can we make sure these resources get out, especially to Catholic schools, superintendent of schools, because we're seeing in some of the Catholic and in the diocese, and you all need to go out and tell you at least you want to hear the pro-life stories. How can we make sure we get that information to the students? Because as a speech and debate coach, we hear Catholic school students saying things in complete opposition to the church. So we need that information to get out, and not just to one principal, to the whole board of the school.
It's a tricky thing to do because a lot of parents don't want their children engaging with that material. And so schools are kind of loath to give that material to students. But I think it starts with, talking with your priest, talking with your pastor, looking at who the parochial vicar is and starting at that level, keeping it local. But you can get the material to them. But, I think part of the challenge is you've got to get good materials that are sensitive to where kids are. And you need good presenters that aren't going to unduly upset kids. Because kids will hear some of the statistics I threw around tonight, and then they're going to think, look, to be honest, there are kids that have had abortions, right, that are in our community. And you don't want a kid thinking, I'm definitely going to get breast cancer. I'm definitely going to, and that's where their minds tend to go. So we need to have people who are good at communicating this kind of thing, preferably people like pediatric and maternity nurses who are trained in this, who work with these kids. That's a fight too. But I understand that I can respect the hesitancy on the part of people because they are responsible for the well-being of those children, and you don't want to push them.